You probably haven't heard of Axel Diederichsen, yet he holds our past, present, and future in the palm of his hand. He's been entrusted to protect a resource our very existence depends upon, and it on us.
It is amazing if you see species, for example, our wheat originated from, and compare them to cultivated wheat. The striking differences, the major steps that were made already 10,000 years ago by humans that understood how to intervene in order to shape these crops that are still feeding the world. That interested me a lot. And then it interested me also how we approach these things today when we adopt these inherited crops and the diversity that we inherited and the diversity we still depend on.
Axel is a seed saver on an international stage. Give him 5 minutes and he'll forever change the way you think about plant cultivation and diversity. He believes the observation of cultivated plants and their diversity is as important to understanding our human history as archaeological artifacts or written records.
The diversity of cultivated plants is extremely interesting. This diversity is man-made diversity. It's a product of culture. Anything that relates to culture has dimensions that go very deep into philosophical questions. So it's very obvious that cultivated plants, and for that matter, of course, also the domesticated animals, are integral part of our history as humans, and that is very fascinating.
Philosophy and science are inseparable in Axel's world. He's a research scientist and the curator of Plant Gene Resources of Canada, or PGRC, our national seed gene bank, located in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. He has dedicated his life to preserving plant diversity because he believes it is important to understanding our past, supporting life in the present, and as building blocks for future needs.
These plants and the very different types of each of those species we have as cultivated plants cannot survive without a farmer or a gardener behind it, or a gene bank curator or gene bank staff that takes care of this diversity. This diversity, on the other hand, is the building block for any products in plant breeding that result in cultivars adapted to the many changes that happen or the new needs we have. So we can only succeed in our agriculture and we can only achieve food security if we can ensure that this diversity remains accessible. If you work in a gene bank, as I am lucky to do here, you have seeds or types of plants that are very historical, ancient, not grown in agriculture today, but there is still this physical reality, which is a living entity that goes through your hands and you maintain it, you can make it grow, you can look at it, you can understand it. At the same time, there is, of course, also the aspect that you can use this material, if you want to use that word, for creating something new in plant breeding, or you can study it and using different tools, including genetics or common scientific analytical approaches. But for the true understanding, you must bring more to the table because there are other dimensions when it comes to products of culture.
The 59-year-old scientist has come a long way from the mixed farm he grew up on in a small village in northern Germany, near the coast of the Baltic Sea and the border with Denmark. In the early 1960s in northern Germany, there was much more diversity on farms. At the Diederichsens, there were cows, pigs, oxen, sows, and many kinds of crops, such as rye, wheat, barley, winter wheat, legumes, and rutabagas to feed the cows. Grassland was included in the rotation for use as a meadow for the cows or for hay. Now, the following decades brought with them large changes to agriculture in this region. Fields became bigger, the use of technology increased, while the diversity on farms decreased, and three major crops, rapeseed, wheat, and barley, became dominant. This evolving agricultural setting, Axel's interactions with nature, and an affinity for the sciences would play a large role in shaping his future. These influences merged to create in Axel a curious disposition and the need to question and understand the world around him.
Growing up on a farm and seeing also the big changes that happened when I was young made me wonder a lot about the way farming is developing, the way the landscape changes, the environment changes. I always took an interest how our approach to science, to nature, and how our thinking impacts the concrete interactions you have with nature, in particular in agriculture, where you shape an environment and you produce the food that is essential for us as humans, because food allows us to stay alive, which is the essential, but also food has the task to allow us to unfold also our capacities as humans, which is much more than going hungry.
From an early age, Axel had a keen interest in nature. He was also fascinated by our relationships with and how we interact, interpret, and shape nature.
My relationship to nature was probably shaped by the environment in which I grew up, and I always had an interest to understand how we as humans fit into nature, where our place is, and how the way we understand nature impacts the way we interact with nature, and then also the way we shape nature. For a while, I thought biology as such might be a very interesting subject to pursue further. But I came back to agriculture because I thought the interaction with nature is the most intensive if you go into agriculture, because there we really shape nature. I had big hesitations towards the science because I felt that sometimes the answers science gives to questions you have about life and nature are very limited in scope. So I always felt and still feel that it is essential to not only rely on data or external observations and measurements when you want to understand nature. I always felt and still feel, and moreover am convinced, that it is possible, not only possible, it is necessary to take a more holistic approach when you want to understand nature. You must always try to understand yourself or the human being as such if you want to understand nature.
In addition to science, Axel enjoyed the humanities and languages, which he says helped broaden his view of the world. After he finished his primary and secondary school education, he served an obligatory term in the civil service. Then, for 2 years, Axel grew cereals and vegetables on a small farm in Norway. After this, during his time spent on a Swiss farm, where he was learning to make cheese, he met a plant breeder who opened up a whole new world to him. Being raised on a farm, Axel thought he had a good understanding of what wheat, barley, and oat crops were. He was to find out he was wrong.
When I saw these collections there, I really understood that my understanding of what these species are is very limited. That fascinated me. And then I wondered, what is it actually what we have in agriculture today in an industrialized countries? What do we grow today? It's actually a very limited spectrum of the entire diversity that exists. In addition, there are many crops that have been forgotten or are not or hardly cultivated today.
The plant breeder was working on cultivars adapted to low input agriculture at high elevations. Axel was introduced to many different types of crop plants he'd never seen before, which helped him make the decision to attend university to study agriculture. Axel decided to undertake a master's and then a doctorate while working at the Leibniz Institute of Plant Genetics and Plant Research, one of the world's top plant gene banks.
You were surrounded by all types of very diverse, unusual crop plants for agriculture, for horticulture, medicinal plants. There I could work with crop diversity and really immerse myself into this sphere of preserving, studying, understanding the diversity of cultivated plants.
Axel joined the German Gene Bank in the early 1990s after the fall of the Berlin Wall, a time of incredible social, political, and economic upheaval. The Gene Bank was located in what was formerly known as East Germany. This waning of Soviet power and the eventual collapse of communist regimes caused great change across Eastern European countries, and there was considerable concern about crop plant diversity loss and seed preservation. As part of the German Gene Bank, Axel was on the front lines of saving and protecting that diversity.
It was also the time after the fall of the wall in Germany. And the German Gene Bank was located in the eastern part of Germany. It was a time of big changes and many new possibilities. We had very interesting interactions with non-governmental organizations that were interested in preserving diversity. Many Eastern European countries underwent big changes. There was, for example, in Poland, a very small structured agriculture that was loaded with diversity of crop plants that were very challenged in their diversity because the big changes, the structural changes that came to agriculture resulted also in a drastic reduction of diversity of crop plants in the fields. So there were many interactions also with people who took an interest in that, and the Gene Bank actively participated in research projects and collecting missions to ensure that this diversity would be preserved.
Axel finished his PhD while working at the German Gene Bank. His passions were, and still are, what he calls big diversity, the preservation of this diversity, and the unanswered questions that go along with them.
I think I'm passionate about diversity of cultivated plants, how it came about, what exists, where are we going with it. Of course, preserving this diversity is an aspect there, yes, that is very important there, but the big passion is probably not so much about this one step or task that is important. Its passion is probably more about the big questions that are behind this diversity of cultivated plants. For me, it was extremely fascinating and is still fascinating that we have many plants we rely on for our food that are very, very different from the wild relative species, which probably have existed much, much longer than the crop plants. The question how these first crop plants or cultivated plants came about is extremely interesting and by far not resolved.
In 1998, opportunity came knocking. The recently relocated Saskatoon-based PGRC was seeking a curator. Axel flew to Canada for an interview, and it couldn't have been a better fit. At the PGRC, Axel's primary task was, and is to this day, to ensure the seeds under his care are in good condition and properly preserved, so they can be used for research, breeding, and education. That's about 115,000 envelopes containing seeds representing approximately 1,000 botanical species. The gene bank's focus is cereals, which make up about 85% of the preserved samples.
We have huge collections of barley, 40,000 accessions of barley, 28,000 samples of oat, and maybe 13,000 samples of wheat, and that includes the crop species and also the crop wild relatives. So there are botanically many species included in these cereal collections.
There are also large collections of forages, flax, rapeseed, including canola, and their wild relatives. Seeds need to be cleaned, entered into the database, and, if it's decided, to become part of the active gene bank collection. Seeds must be stored in large vaults, which are kept at +4 and -20 degrees Celsius for longer term storage. Also, backup samples are deposited at the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway, just in case something happens to the seed samples in Saskatoon. These tasks are only a part of Axel's duties at the PGRC. Axel compares his job as curator with running a seed business.
You have to ensure that the seeds are viable, that you have sufficient seeds. You have to be in contact with the clients that need the seeds. You have to produce information about the seeds, and you have to do that with a larger group of people. This requires a lot of organizational tasks that you have to work on, staffing tasks, making decisions, which crops to plant, setting priorities, using the resources you have available in the most efficient way.
For the curator, there's also the scientific component of the job: research, breeding, the study of specimens and aspects of crop diversity in the collection, collaboration with other scientists, exchanges of information, screening for trait qualities like disease resistance, and reviewing research papers, among other duties. Axel also enjoys the routine and organizational aspects of his position, as well as working with and managing a team with the same interests and passion for saving seeds.
What I love most about my job has probably two sides. One is the possibility to contribute to this noble task to preserve cultural heritage, the diversity of our crop plants that might be lost otherwise. That's very satisfying. The second aspect is the work with the people, and that can be the people I directly work with. If you can share a little bit of this enthusiasm, it creates a very positive work atmosphere. And I feel that I'm very privileged to work with a group here of people who are really dedicated to this. And maybe it is this positive task that inspires all of us to really be engaged.
Before the COVID-19 pandemic, Axel also traveled the globe, engaging in international aspects of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture.
Countries from all over the world work together on this task to preserve the genetic diversity of our crop plants. So I interact with colleagues and help to develop Canadian positions or ensure Canada makes contributions to the international efforts in this regard. This trust is something that I deeply appreciative of, and I must say that I feel that I'm very lucky in that regard.
Now, crop diversity attracts attention at local, national, and international levels, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic, which has emphasized the need for strong, safe, and secure food value chains. And it's not just industry stakeholders paying attention to plant diversity, but the general public, which Axel says is a good direction.
In general, what I see as very, very positive is that many people, many more than in the past, seem to take an interest in this diversity of crop plants. And that is not only scientists and plant breeders who have very sophisticated tools today to work with this diversity, but it's also the general public. If you see what is happening in many cities here in Canada, also you see community gardens, you see people take an interest in their food, the diversity of food. The recent developments with this pandemic have maybe even increased this interest in questioning where does our food come from, what can we do locally. So in general, I think we have much more engagement from many more people in this area, which I see as very, very positive. Because the more people that engage in this field, the more diversity you will have, and the work of preserving this, working actively with this, rests on more shoulders. And that is what really makes such a system also sustainable. It would not be sustainable to have only these tasks in the hands of a very limited and few people or experts.
Axel has spent his life following his passion to preserve and better understand the diversity of crop plants and their wild relatives. It took an international village to raise this Canadian seed saver, who is not only preserving seeds, but our cultural heritage while securing our present and future food and fiber needs. He's not looking for attention, thanks, or praise. For him, it is an honor to do so.
I was invited as an immigrant to this country to help with preserving this national treasure of global significance. That really is a big privilege. I have always felt that from the very beginning, and I still do so, that this country has entrusted this task to me. That is a big privilege.